exercise, that's for sure. But I thought the best place to start would be to ask you how you earned the nickname the Granimal, the history of that nickname.
Wow, that's a great story. And that goes back to the rugged wrestling mats in the Constitution State of Connecticut, my home state. You know, I was first given that name, the Granimal, by one of our wrestling coaches, Charles Anderson, because my last name is Granahan, and I was always battling, never afraid to battle guys when I was younger, of heavier weights, and tearing people up on the mat. And he said, this guy's an animal, you know. And when he gave me my first award at the banquet, one of the banquets, he called me up on stage and he said, this guy's an animal. He's Granahan. He's an animal. He's the Granimal. So that's where that came from. And everybody back home always called me the Granimal. That nickname still resonates. I went back in 2017 to my alma mater. It was funny because Chucky was coaching at another high school, and the current coach, Joe Fernandez, he reached out to me through another beast wrestler, really the best wrestler in the history of our high school, Spiro Papakosmos, who was a great buddy of mine. And they reached out to me and they said, we need the Granimal to come back and save the team, save the town, because they had those old nasty squishy mats. You know, if anybody knows anything about wrestling mats, you get fungus and they got the tears in them, just the nasty squishy mats with all the germs on them. So I went back and I headlined that fundraiser, went against Cauliflower Chase Brown, who some folks may know from Ring of Honor. Also a guy that's got a stud amateur background. He was actually coached in grappling and MMA by a guy who was an old teammate of mine at Billy Wicks's old school, Michael Allen Cornbread. Coached him for it, and they did a really, really entertaining vignette. But in the end, you know, I stretched him like a rubber band, hit him with the gut wrench and the old bear hug, because we're the Norwalk Bears. Bear hug from the top for the 1, 2, 3, and then he came at me and I busted the cauliflower over his head. So it was great to come back to my hometown, man. After moving out of there several years prior, you know, I moved out of Norwalk back in 93. So I had been in another part of the state, but I was still down in Norwalk. I was slinging booze down there for years at the bars down in Norwalk. But yeah, had a great time, you know, doing that. And yeah, so that's where the journey began. I remember I was in the locker room in 2017, and Dan Severn and I had done a clinic for my old high school, and Dan and I are in the locker room. And Dan, of course, he was on the undercard on that show. I was in the main event, of course. And I said to Dan, this is it, man. Not doing anything anymore with combat sports or pro wrestling, because it began here in Norwalk, and in this very gym, and it's going to end here. And just like Don Corleone, you know, when you think you're out, they pull you back in. And that's when I got back to South Carolina and got a call from Phil Baroni, who had brought into pro wrestling, telling me we need to get Bonner in. We need to get Stephan Bonner in, you know, and then brought him in. And you know, it's wild, because the combat sports has always been a hobby for me, but it's always been something that I'm constantly pulled back into, you know.
We have a fan question here from Bob, who wants to know, is it true that the Gaudis put a hit out on you and bullet Bobby C?
Oh, geez. Are we going to go there? Are we going to go there with this?
I guess we are. Yes, sir.
Oh, man. Well, hold on one second. I got to decline. I'm getting a call from Berman Law Group. We constantly are going with Berman Law Group. Getting a call from our Boca office. We deal with a number of cases, and we can double back to that. And because I'm with Berman Law Group, I'm going to not going to completely answer that question. But I will say this, you know, the Gottis don't really have any authority to put a hit out on anybody, and haven't for years. You know, I'm friends with Johnny A-Light. He's been here on Hannibal TV. He had his big feud back and forth with Gotti Jr., and he's done some great interviews with me at our TBT podcast, at our podcast studio in Boca Raton. But to answer that question, he mentions a guy named Bullet Bobby C, who is Bob Carson. And Bob Carson, Bullet Bobby C, he's a guy who's had a background on the streets, and he actually was one of the media reporters when we did the Call Out, which is also here on Hannibal TV, with Johnny A, with John Elite. He wanted to flat box Gotti Jr., even at their advanced ages. And because of the history with Phil Baroni and the Gambino family, he wanted to have a MMA fight between Phil Baroni and Gotti III. Now, Gotti III had actually called Phil out earlier in his career. That ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen because Derek Panza, who Phil had trained with before, they're just not into it. There's a number of factors or reasons why. It's too much to get into. But Bullet Bobby C would be great to fight Gotti III in MMA. He's the guy who's a veteran in MMA, veteran broadcaster, and he's got that background from the street too. That question was about hit from the Gottis. He's got that background. So it's all about making money. That'd be a good fight to make money. Or in celebrity boxing, you know, I've hosted celebrity boxing before, and Christine Curran and Natalie DiDonato, two gorgeous tomatoes, have been on Hannibal TV here, interviewed with the Hannibal, and they boxed each other. Nat D from VH1 Mob Wives and Christine Curran from Dining Divas. These are all content you can check out here in the Hannibal. We've got so much, you know, you guys have so much other content, but I brought tons of content to the Hannibal over the years. Absolutely. And I think with a boxing match, maybe between Bullet Bobby C and Gotti III, might be the best at this point. But to answer that question, no, the Gottis, you know, I heard that rumor, but they don't have the stroke to do it at this point anyway. You know, they're completely out of the life, have been for some time.
Well, fair enough. We'll circle back to Cosa Nostra in general if we have time at the end. I just thought it would be a good segue to get into your illustrious MMA career, and especially the fact that you have some significant credentials. You're a Hall of Famer in the Florida MMA Hall of Fame, inducted in 2017, and have basically a wide range of experience from all facets of that business. I'm wondering if you could speak to begin with in terms of your relationship with the Bellator company.
Sure. Bellator is a major piece, but I kind of have to lead into that because I've worn every hat you can wear. I was going up and down the road with Dan Severn back a few months ago. I had him in our studio in Boca at Berman Law Group. And then also we were doing some clinics together, and, you know, we were talking, and he says he's worn every hat. I said, Dan, you haven't really worn every hat. I've worn every hat you've worn. I've been a professional wrestler. I've competed, but have you managed any guys? Have you ever dealt with Zuffa? Have you ever dealt with Mike Murch? I have. Have you ever worked for one of the top major companies, you know, in marketing, and been one of two men to write their marketing plan that they're still using today? You know, I have. Have you had a career for over a quarter century, a successful career in liquor distribution? This has basically just been a hobby for me, you know, the combat sports. So kind of joshing with Dan about that. But yeah, Bellator, I was prime marketing consultant with them. And it was a tenuous time. It was at the end of Bjorn Rebney's tenure. Scott Coker was coming in. And if you remember, the Spike TV brand was built by UFC. Definitely. You know, they built the brand. So when they hopped over to Fox at that time, the Spike TV executives were panicking. And I had sent you a clip from my old show, King's Court, that I used to do with Brian Snow out of Chicago, where it had a lengthy clip of one of our marketing sessions. And essentially, if you look at what the news is for them right now, today, is that they're going to get Nick Diaz over there. So the whole idea was to get the UFC's marquee stars, put them on the top, kind of like the Rolling Stones philosophy, to help build your smaller guys up, but also to get press. And on my old show, King Mo and I, who was a big star with Bellator, had a long conversation about this. Fans follow hype. You're always going to have the hardcore fans. It's like this with pro wrestling too. Why do you think Vince McMahon with WrestleMania brought in Cyndi Lauper, in the MTV, which was huge at that time, and the Rock and Wrestling Connection? You've got to appeal to a broader audience. And that really was what I did with Bellator. I was managed Stephan Bonnar, and I was trying to get the Stephan Bonnar-Tito Ortiz fight, because that fight was fireworks. But we couldn't get, the Stephan Bonnar-Forrest Griffin fight was the one that we really wanted to get, because that was fireworks. That was the fight that had built the sport. That was the foundation of the sport after Ultimate Fighter. So we couldn't get Forrest. So the next best thing was get Tito. And then put Tito in the cage with one of his old coaches and good friends that was now part of Bonner's camp under a mask, and just watch. And Bonner's so good at working the fans, and he worked Tito in that segment, and it was fireworks, man. And then it's the only time in the history that Bellator has beaten UFC head to head in the ratings, was that Tito Ortiz Stephan Bonnar fight. So yeah, I had a brief tenure there in marketing. I worked with 3 Group with Spike TV, and I can kind of speak to with Vince Russo, because he was recently people were kind of chastising him about his role with the USA Network. What I was doing for Spike TV was very similar to what he's doing for USA, except that we wrote a marketing plan for them to follow, and also the timing was huge, because they were freaking out because they didn't have any name fighters, and yet they were the MMA company on Spike, and UFC had been built on UFC. So I think we did a good job. I mean, Bellator's still around today and still talked about today.
Where do you think, when Spike had that fight block where TNA they were I believe the lead-in, where do you think some opportunities were missed there? I know they tried to have King Mo and Ortiz on. It didn't seem to really capitalize on the hotness of that product to bring up there, even though by today's standards they were drawing quite well, 1.2 million, etc. But do you think they could have done anything differently to really capitalize on how hot MMA was at that time? Yeah,
they didn't do enough with Tito at all. I mean, it seemed like it was kind of dysfunctional with what they were doing. And with King Mo. I mean, King Mo was doing pro wrestling for quite a while. He was working on the indies. He was trying to perfect his style, and they didn't really give those guys enough creative, and they didn't do much with it. I mean, it just fizzled out.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It seemed to be a lost opportunity, and we're gonna talk about your relationship with Jeff Jarrett in a bit. But I'm wondering if you could fill us in on your very interesting and successful book, Rough and Tumble.
Oh yeah, awesome. Yeah. So Rough and Tumble, I just did a book signing the other night. I did a clinic over at down in Titusville, over at Fighting Edge, and book signing. And that book came about because I was in California and I was training with Eric Paulson, and Eric and I had a similar background, and I had the idea for the book, and we had a similar background regarding how we were trained in submissions from the catch wrestling lineage. And he, of course, was a champion, world champion in Shooto, which predated UFC, and that was a promotion that Tiger Mask actually founded, and then Yuri Nakamura in Japan. So we were talking. Now this goes back 14, 15 years. That fighters didn't know their roots and didn't know their history. And Billy Wicks, who was my old coach and mentor in the Carolinas, he had given me the idea about writing a book about this, but we didn't really know what we weren't serious about doing it. But then after practice, Eric and I would go out to this barbecue bar and have some beers, and that was really where that came from. There was another fighter named Matt Covan, who was from Billy Wicks's camp too, in North Carolina, who was training out there at the same time, and he kind of chimed in a little bit. And so it got to be something that came from like writing on the napkin at the bars and ideas to me going out. I was put on a severance at the time because the company I was working with was being bought out. So I had money coming in and I had time. So I went out and I did deep research on this book. I mean, interviewed everybody from Red Bastien and Frankie Kane that people will know from pro wrestling, who came out of the carnies. We researched the history of Jiu Jitsu with Count Koma, Mitsuya Maeda. It's the definitive history book, how it's all tied together. Because what a lot of fans don't know is, even like with amateur wrestling, before Hugo Optopolek changed the rules of amateur wrestling, they were doing twisting arm locks, they were doing neck cranks, they were doing toe holds on the mat scholastically, and he took all that out. So the roots of grappling, of MMA, of pro wrestling, they're all from the same tree. And if you read this book, you're going to have that knowledge that so many fans don't have, and so many fighters don't have, of their own sport.
Yeah, it sounds like everyone should check it out that calls himself a fight fan. I wanted your opinion on the state of MMA today. We hear a lot of chatter in terms of, especially following the UFC sale, that the genres somewhat peaked and buy rates are down, and we don't have the main events that are drawing the buzz that previous incarnations did. And I'm just wondering about what your thoughts are in terms of the product and what could be done to recapture some of that buzz and create more profitable events moving forward.
So what I think there is, I think it's important for fans to understand that the business model changed from the time I was with Spike and working on the Bellator brand. Now UFC, they get big money for their cable deals. So they're not as concerned anymore about ratings. And I do think it's niche to a certain degree, but I mean, they're drawing big money on their pay-per-views. So I think that they're very content in that regard. And there's not the pressure on getting the TV ratings like there used to be, back and forth between UFC and Bellator.
Plus the revenue from streaming services, maybe, that wasn't there before.
Yeah, absolutely. That too, for sure.
So to segue into your professional wrestling history, you were or are involved in the industry as an independent worker and other roles for the past 25 years, and have a great deal of involvement in the business from all ends. Well, I'm just wondering, to start with, did you have a favorite wrestler or promotion growing up that sort of sparked your interest in pro wrestling per se?
Yeah, Jack. Back when I was growing up, and the kids today won't understand this. Like, I grew up on the Long Island Sound, right outside of New York City, and Connecticut, in Norwalk. And on any given Saturday morning, we were watching AWA, World Class, out of Texas. We would get Florida Championship Wrestling even when I was a kid. And, of course, WWF, which was the big show. And TBS, at the time, which the history of that is pretty wild because Vince tried to come in one year and there was a big backlash, from
Black
the fans.
Sunday.
Yeah, but I used to love it because, I'm talking when I was a kid, when I was 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, 11. I used to sit there and watch. You could watch pro wrestling from the time you got up on Saturday right up into the afternoon. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And my favorite, I was a Hulkamaniac, man, because brother, I should say I was a Hulkamaniac, brother. And
we all, right?
yeah, because the Hulkster was larger than life, man. I loved the A-Team. I was a big fan of the A-Team and Mr. T, and I was a big fan of MTV. I'm old school. I was the MTV era that I grew up in. My daughter's 20, but even if she was 30, would she have even heard music on MTV? It's been so long since that was really a music television channel. I don't know when they stopped, but it's crazy to me because, man, I was a wrestling junkie, pro wrestling junkie. I absolutely loved it. And I loved the characters. And I got into wrestling myself when I was in junior high and middle school, going back to when I was in junior high and middle school. And the reason that I gravitated to wrestling was when I was in junior high, we had a small wrestling room that was up above the basketball gym. And we used to go in gym class. We had a gym teacher, Mr. Mulvey, where we used to go out at it and wrestle. And it was because of pro wrestling that I loved it. And Mulvey was showing us head and arm throws and hip tosses and some of the stuff that you saw on TV because we were kids. He was showing us exciting stuff, and yeah, I think about it. I was telling Dan Severn just the other day, because he talked about how long he's been coaching. I've been coaching wrestling, 32 years. I started coaching, youth wrestling like in 1990. So yeah, 32 years. So and the funny thing is, man, with the sport of wrestling, wrestling was my sport in high school. I set a pinning record, and I got into freestyle too in the spring because we had, and to explain this is important to explain too, because this is a pro wrestling channel. A lot of people don't understand it. Even when I listen to some pro wrestlers talk about amateur wrestling, they don't even understand. They'll say, oh, Greco-Roman. No, in America, scholastically, we have folk style. And folk style, there's a lot more mat wrestling. And you guys up there, you have freestyle. And freestyle, we used to have, when I was coming up, you could compete in freestyle in the spring, if you weren't doing another spring sport. So you could do folk style, and freestyle. And I was one of the few ones that did freestyle. And I had some success with freestyle, after high school and college. I won the Nutmeg Open Games one year. And I was a good wrestler. I was a fast pinner, a strong. I was never the greatest, but it was always something that I would get burned out on. In college, I got burned out on wrestling. And when I was in college, man, I was lifeguarding at the school pool at Fairfield U with this hot little girl, Bridget. And so she was a swimmer. So, and they were D1, so I did 2 sports in college. I swam for 2 years and still did freestyle, in the spring. And it was wild because I had swam when I was younger, and then I was did water polo, but I was always a really strong swimmer because I had lifeguarded. So I could only do the 50 free, in medley or whatever. But I just did it because of the babes, because we didn't have fraternities, and all the swimmer's house was really hot. Like, all the hot girls were always over there, man. So yeah. But wrestling has always been a part of my life. God, I'm still coaching now, which is wild. I would have never thought that I would still be involved in it. But in the MMA world, wrestling was a deficit back in the day. And Kamal Shalarus and I, who I lived with in Austin and competed with, and then he went on to UFC, and I managed him through his career. He and I were big into doing seminars and clinics, and Eric kind of helped us with that. But we never reached the level of CSW or scientific wrestling. Jake Shannon, who does excellent clinics, we never really reached that level. But it was fun to do, and there's still a wrestling deficit. The gym that I was coaching for, that I'm coaching for around here, is in the city. They're kickboxers, and if you can teach them just enough, and you can tailor the wrestling to MMA, you can really help them along.
So it seems like a natural trend progression from your amateur background to the pros. What was the defining moment that you made the decision to get into the pro side of things? And can you comment on your training?
Yeah, man, there was no defining moment at all, man. What it was way back in the mid 90s, and like 95, I was going to Akari Judo, just as something to do. A lot of wrestlers were doing judo, and that was back when you could still attack the legs, and it was fun. I was just doing it for sport judo, and buddy of mine who's from a rival high school, my buddy Dave, he goes, I'm doing pro wrestling. And I said, man, I've always wanted to do pro wrestling, man, but I never knew how the hell you get into it. How do you do it? And he goes, well, I'm going to the school. He was going to Killer Kowalski school. And I never went to pro wrestling school. And that's why my pro wrestling style is what it is. I went around with Dave, and we went through our matches at the judo dojo. And a lot of guys can't follow. I'll do indie shows, and I had one indie show I did where I get in the back and I can't find my jumpsuit, my King of Connecticut jumpsuit. And my buddy Chuck Sloan comes over to me. This was at American Pro Wrestling in Spartanburg. And he goes, the kid you wrestled is crying, and he's telling everybody that you shot on him. And apparently he had taken my jumpsuit and kicked it under the ring. He was so mad. And I said, kid, if I had shot on you, you'd be in the hospital. I said, you just couldn't follow me, so I just wrestled you. And that's the way that I do pro wrestling. They can't keep up, because if we're hand fighting and you're going to do a snap down and I'm giving you an opening, if you don't take that opening, I'm guzzling your ass up. And that's the way I do pro wrestling. That's the way pro wrestling's supposed to be. It's professional wrestling. Wrestling is what it says on the marquee. There can be different styles. It can be a variety, but at the end of the day, it's supposed to be wrestling. And that's why I brought guys from the amateur wrestling mat, like Steve Volponi and Shane Lee from Citadel College, and guys like Stephan Bonner and Phil Baroni and Kamal Shalarus, with me to professional wrestling, to toughen professional wrestling up. And I know Hannibal's big on that, because Billy Wicks, who was one of my mentors and good friends and coaches, he was Sputnik Monroe's rival out in Memphis. But when I met him, he was teaching grappling, in MMA. And that's, to me, is pro wrestling, old school pro wrestling. It comes out of the carnies. Read the book, understand the history. It's not for these little whiny babies. I was on Kevin Sullivan's podcast last year, and we were talking about that. And Kevin was sharing his background and his history with Mike Graham. They had to actually go in there and wrestle Mike Graham. And Warren Harding was a guy that I talked to quite a bit. He's the one who broke the sugar hold. Bob Roop Sugarhold. So, and I think what they ought to do with professional wrestling is bring back the Carney Challenge, or where it comes from. People will whine and say you can't do it, but there are grappling schools all over the place now. And that's going to bring me to the company I'm working for now, which I'm very excited to be a part of, which is called Shoot Pro Wrestling.
I was going to ask you to talk about that. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm the color commentator, excuse me, as well as doing the creative for Shoot Pro Wrestling. And Shoot Pro Wrestling is Jake Shannon's organization. And Jake Shannon is from Scientific Wrestling. He has put on the best clinics, in the country for fighters. So many fighters go to his clinics. He was his pro wrestling lineage. He did pro wrestling to himself. Excuse me, but he was also very tight with Billy Robinson, the late great Billy Robinson, and knew Carl Gotch. And he does seminars with Wade Chalice, who is the pinning machine, has the record for most pins, with world UFC champion Josh Barnett, that was also in pro wrestling. And Jake has run 4 shows, I believe, for Shoot. And I'm coming on board as his color commentator. And what we want to do, man, is we want to make pro wrestling fun again, make it cool again, and make it real again. And when it comes down to it, everything outside the ring is going to be wild attitude era. But when you step through those ropes, it's going to be wrestling. And it's even tag team matches. I can send you guys the links to watch. And we'd love to pair up with Great North Wrestling maybe at some point, maybe even have a Shoot champion. I don't want to speak for Jake, but we're open to ideas, man, for shows.
So you would agree that the current product, speaking, not only of WWE but AEW, et cetera, the over choreographing, so to speak, of the matches right down to hold for hold, et cetera. There's quite a bit lost in that approach, the emotion of it and the realism.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot lost, but also scripting promos. Scripting promos. I mean, you got to have characters, man. I like MJF. I haven't seen him in the ring that much, but I love his promos. And I just saw him with Tony Schiavone, and I don't know all the wrestlers, but one of the other wrestlers, where he was doing a little segment there and roughed the guy up. And I like him. He's a true heel. I actually saved the youth of Eastern Kentucky when I battled my former MMA rival Adam Newsom in Kentucky by introducing a foreign object to save the youth, that being the toothbrush, back in 2016. And that was the one that had old Jimsy there, was my manager, because that company used to be part of Cornette's territory. That Bluegrass Championship Wrestling, BCW. And one of my most popular and favorite commentaries here on the Hannibal TV is about old Jimsy stroking that tennis racket while he's watching some of the wrestlers attempt to inseminate his prized heifer.
The old hot tub gimmick, right?
Yeah. No, I gotta say, I didn't have that experience with Cornette, but he did steal one of my jokes. He stole that fried chicken joke, and that's also another commentary that I did with Hannibal about how he was fired from NWA. Yeah. So
do you think the I was gonna, of course, get to James E as a great friend and supporter of the Hannibal TV. Do you think his character is just that, a character? Do you think that a lot of the hyperbole that he spouts is just that, to create controversy and get views, or is he legitimately, based on your interactions with him, somewhat of an offside individual?
I'll tell you, man, to be honest, my interactions with Jimsy were great, because he was totally marking out to my book. And well, he was with Phil Baroni and I in Charlotte for a few days, and he was kissing my ass because he was a big fan of shooters. I don't understand why. I mean, the most athletic thing he's ever done is to dangle from that scaffold and fall down and blow his knee out.
But he talks about his elbow drop too, right?
Yeah. You know, he's funny because when I was with him there, I had to be honest, he was very helpful for my match. But then I start to see him and listen to his show. God, I got to tell you guys a funny story, man. So 2020, I was with this chick, Kanata. She was mulatto, really hot, you know, really nice rack. She was a sweet girl in South Carolina, in Columbia, and she loved to sing. So she took me to this karaoke bar. It was really laid back karaoke bar. And the guy had wrestling on, and he had like from the 90s to early 2000s TBS wrestling on. So I said, man, that's really cool. So I started talking to this dude, right? And we're singing, we're doing karaoke, and he's telling me he's a big Jim Cornette fan. So I told him, yeah, Jim Cornette was my manager, man. And I showed him some of the stuff, and he's like, oh, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. So he exchanges my number, and I totally forgot about this guy, right? And then, like, right around, it was just after Christmas last year, between Christmas and New Year's Day, I start getting these text messages, all in capitals, about what an asshole I am. Go fuck yourself. You know, all this. It was this guy that ran that karaoke bar, and he had seen my commentary here on Hannibal about Jimsy, and he lost his mind over it. So I thought that was hysterical. Big Jimsy fan. Yeah, Jimsy's fans are pretty loyal. But I mean, the thing that bothers me about him too, man, is it's like, it's okay if you want to talk politics, that's fine. But he's so hateful against anybody that doesn't believe what he believes, man. And it's really, and it doesn't make a lot of sense what he believes to me. I don't understand where he's coming from with himself being an older man. But, you know, I wouldn't be with that prized heifer either. So I just never understand the guy, man.
Well, his fans are called the cult for a reason, I think. So
Yeah.
you're bang on there. Another individual that you've had some interactions with, so to speak, and provided some content on our channel is the one and only Nature Boy Ric Flair. I've got a couple of questions for you about Nate. Beginning with, I know you saw his last match, and this week there's been some reports that Steamboat's back in training at 69, and he's going to work a match. And Flair said, I'm going to go train now because there's nothing else to do. And I'm just wondering on your thoughts of, I mean, a lot of people were saying this is going to be yet another retirement, like a Terry Funk style retirement. But what are your thoughts on him continuing to work, given that I got to be honest with you, I watched the match, great card from Mr. Thompson, I believe, but like a lot of fans, I was wondering, holy cow, is this guy going to make it through? And just wondering what your thoughts are first about him continuing to work matches.
Well, you know, he's going to do whatever he wants. You know, I never stop people from doing what they want to do, but the whole drama of that match, and I'll tell you, man, I was glued to it. The whole drama of that match was that Rick might kick the bucket, man. That was what the drama was. And when I did that review, Hannibal had me do a review. I did a review of the roast and of the show and the match. And I was thinking, and I booked some indie wrestling shows before myself. And I was thinking they should have put that like they used to do back in the day with Saturday Night's Main Event, where Hogan's match would be the first. They should have put that first, because I'm thinking they're going to lose the fans with this match, because you know it's going to be slow paced. But the fact that Jeff and Karen Jarrett, and I know both of them, and I want to say, Karen Jarrett, very sexy woman. And Jeff and Karen Jarrett played they were such great heels. They're such great heels. That and the drama that Rick may not make it out alive kept me glued to my seat watching that match. They can't replicate that. I mean, I don't understand it, but he's going to do what he wants to do. I mean, I think actually, anybody over 45, and I'm well over 45, anybody over 45 really should do it. I was going to do my last match with Hannibal for that Pit of Wawa show. And that I was just going to kind of do that because I've been goofing on Rick so much, and just take a guy, stretch him like a rubber band and show Rick how it should be done. But it gets to be kind of ridiculous at a certain point, man. And I think we're past that point with the nature boy.
I would agree. And you've had some interactions with Rick on a personal level regarding his I don't know whether that's his wife, ex-wife, or whatever. Wendy.
Wait, I gotta take care of her. She's over here. Actually, I will be back in a matter of seconds. I'm gonna step outside of my screen house right now. I just need to drain the lizard real quick. Got to use the restroom. I'll be back in 1 minute.
Roger.
And
So fans, just to let you know, on a preliminary basis, in the weeks and months to come, we'll be making some announcements about the future of Great North Wrestling coming back to Ontario in 2023. We're working on a number of exciting prospects, and there will be more detail to come. But stay tuned for your social media platforms. We will be releasing information as it becomes available.
Well, the great thing about being out here in Florida, out in the country a bit, is you can just go relieve yourself right outside. There's in the woods here. It's beautiful here in Florida, and nice and warm. I love it.
Can't be beat.
So you're asking about the nature boy, and you're asking about Miss Wendy. Oh man, I've told this story so many times. Do you want me to give you the quick Reader's Digest version again of what went down?
Yes, please. Okay, for those that may not be aware.
So I'll tell you. On my shirt, it says TBT, the Berman team. And that's Berman Law Group. And I host the podcast for Berman Law Group. And we have, my producer is Evan Golden. I got to give him a shout out. He was the star of Ivana Young Man with Ivana Trump, reality show star. TBT, the Bermans, man, we're huge in Florida. We have our TBT magazine. We have the best parties. And so I've had a number of great guests on, and you can watch the TBT podcast here on the Hannibal TV. It airs here on Hannibal. And so Evan wanted me specifically to get Ric Flair on the show. And I'd known Rick for quite a number of years. I knew Rick going way back to when I used to bounce for my buddy Rob Schmansky's bar, Docksides on Lake Murray. That was probably 2007. He was married to Tiffany back then. I don't know what number she was, but she was snotty. She was a trainer at the gym. She was stuck up. She wouldn't look at you. And so I knew him then because he was drowning his sorrows at the bar, so I got to know him a bit. And sad with his son, Reed, because I worked with Reed a little bit before he passed in wrestling, and horrible situation. But I was out on Rick's boat in 2016 in Lake Lanier, and I had a beautiful lady, Gloria, with me. She was Mexican and Lebanese, very, very sexy. And as Rick said, very exotic. And he was out there. We're on the boat, and she's got her bikini on, and he is just coming up to her just like he's bellying up to the bar. You're so exotic. Oh, Matt, you're so, I love her. I love her, Matt. I love her, Matt. I want to take her home. And so she came to me and she says, this guy's making me uncomfortable. I said, that's the nature boy. You know, he's just being the nature boy. So anyway, when talking to Rick about being on the podcast, she said, Matt, do you have any pictures? Maybe some video of that girl from the boat? And I said, no, but, you know, been living with this beautiful Venezuelan. I might be able to give you some pictures maybe of her sister or this other Dominican in my stable. And so I sent him a couple. It was actually Lucy, this Dominican, that got him in trouble. And I sent him the pictures in the video, which she was giving herself great pleasure in the video. And Rick calls me in the afternoon, and I'm really tied up. And I said, man, Rick, I can't talk. What's going on? He goes, you got to call Wendy. Tell her that the picture, those videos, they're for your other friend. So I said, okay. And I was busy. And then that night, he's texts me all in caps, Matt, you never called Wendy. Kill yourself. And as far as those, and these are all on the Hannibal. You can read these print screens because I gave him the Hannibal. It's probably worse than that, but essentially, kill yourself. And then he ends it with those girls. You send me those videos of. They just don't hold a candle to Wendy. Dare to dream. So obviously she'd seen his phone, you know. So I didn't think anything. I laughed about it, you know, because she told me, you know, Wendy told me, you know, he's drinking every day, like 3 p.m. because we wanted to host a party for us. Don't make the party too late because he's going to fall asleep. He passes out. Which I thought was kind of funny. I said, man, he can't just go one day. So anyway, I see in the news that they split. And then I just go, oh, man, I'm in Florida. She's in Rosemary Beach, which isn't that close, but took a pictures of myself in the pool, and I started sending them to her. And she's like, I'm so jealous of your tan. I need to get caught up. And we need to get caught up. You know, let's meet for mimosas. So I thought like nothing of it. And I said, you're in Rosemary? And she goes, yeah. I said, yeah, I'll come out like Sunday, whatever. That night, it had to be, wasn't that late. It had to be 9:30, 10 o'clock. I start getting these messages from Rick. He has the print screens of my messages, and he's threatening me to find out where I live. I'm going to hunt you down. I'm going to find out where you live. And then I let it go for a little while, and I went on Kevin Sullivan's show, and he calls me from a block number, and he goes, you know who this is? And I said, no. He goes, it's Rick. You better stay out of Rosemary, you son of a bitch. And then Kevin Sullivan tells me, and Andrew Anderson, who's been on this show too, that I did a show with them in Daytona, and they tell me Rick is out of his mind. He wants to kill you. He can't sleep. So I got to say, who you're looking at, the real dirtiest player in the game. Woo! But I also want to say, Rick and Wendy, I wish you nothing but the best.
Entertaining stories about Flair abound, it seems, and continue to abound.
Yeah.
Just to finalize the pro wrestling discussion of the interview, I'm curious as to your personal thoughts on the big players moving forward in terms of WWE with Triple H at the helm as creative, and the current it sounds like chaotic situation in AEW, and where you see both those companies ending up moving forward in terms of business.
Well, you know, it's interesting. What was most interesting is everyone talks about Vince, and I'm thinking his age. I mean, he should have long been retired and rode off into the sunset and enjoyed himself. I don't understand all these $1 million multi-million-dollar non-disclosure agreements made no sense to me, because what's the point if it's all going to get disclosed anyway, you know? And when it comes down to it with Triple H, I mean, I think he's a good guy to run it because he comes from the Attitude Era, and that's the era that I like. So I like that they're going to do more, PG-13, type stuff. AEW, I think that Tony Khan is just, it's like the patients running the insane asylum, the old saying, because he doesn't really have any control over it, over that organization. So I think in the long run, the WWE will be the leader, man, and continue to be the leader. What do you think? What do you think of AEW, Jack?
Well, I decided, well, they're into their third year of operations almost. When the initial rollout took place, we were promised a more sports oriented product and hearkening back to the roots of pro wrestling, and I found it to be anything but. I think Mr. Khan signed too many guys, talent sitting there wasting that he can't possibly use. And I'm not really a fan of the spot fest style, but I think any organization that exists that can give the workers a healthy payday is a good thing. So I'm pulling for them to succeed, but I think they need to make some significant changes and be a little less rigid. And it seems to me that every second of every spot of every match is planned out, and there's a need for, as you put it before, a little more, well, less of the botches that several Twitter accounts make their bones about, but a little more catch as catch can and realistic style. And I think they would bring in more fans to incorporate emotion and storyline again. Because honestly, I can't follow their story. I don't watch Dark. I don't watch Elevation. So, on their two main shows, it's very hard to follow from my perspective.
I think you're going to love Shoot Pro Wrestling, because it's all the elements that you talked about. I mean, these are 100% legitimate matches. We've got some of the top grapplers in the country. We've got Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar, the two that made the UFC, that put the UFC on the map. Any fans that don't know, that may be too young to know, the UFC was an underground sport. I mean, my good friend is Art Davey, and when Art had that company, I mean, they were considered human cockfighting by politicians, and they went through a whole period of time where they were completely out of the media. I mean, they had such a small fan base, and then they gambled on the Ultimate Fighter reality show, and the winners at the end of that show were Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin, and they had a fight that was considered to be arguably the greatest fight in MMA history. It may not have been the greatest, but certainly one of the greatest. And the ratings spiked during the airing of that show, Ultimate Fighter. And that's why during my tenure with Bellator, we recreated that magic with Stephan Bonnar and Tito Ortiz. But Forrest and Stephan are a part of this brand. They just did our latest commercial, and I'm not going to give anything away, but we've got some stuff coming that is going to blow your mind with Shoot Pro Wrestling. And if there's ever any opportunities for us to partner up with Great North Wrestling in any capacity, I think we should explore those as well. And I'm thinking maybe in terms of a shows that you're doing in the States, because I saw when you had the Maestro on, you were saying that you're going to be doing some shows possibly in New York and maybe Michigan.
Upstate, yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. So yeah, I mean, I don't follow pro wrestling that closely anymore. I'll still watch it when I'm flipping through the channels. I watch more. If I'm going to watch pro wrestling, I watch old school pro wrestling right off of YouTube. But from what I understand, and just given the dynamics, I think that Tony Khan might be like another Dixie Carter. Nothing against Dixie Carter, but just in the sense that he doesn't really know the business and just has some money to play around with, and the workers are going to work him, and not to the benefit of the actual company. So I put my money on WWE in the long run.
I would agree. And if you saw that media scrum following the last pay-per-view, it would seem that that's exactly the case. Not a lot of control. Phil Collins wanted to say, everyone from Fighting Edge wants to thank you, King, for working with us and signing your book, Rough and Tumble. Thanks again.
Awesome. Phil is a great guy, man. Warrior Phil Collins. And he's good friends with my buddy Larry Matza, who's here on the Hannibal TV. I've interviewed a number of times, and say hello to beautiful Sunshine Melissa Love over there, who does the videography. The most beautiful gal in the Sunshine State. Sunshine Melissa Love, Fighting Edge, great gym, Titusville. I'll be back there again soon.
Excellent.
And I love coaching, and I still love coaching, and I'll tell you that it's the fundamentals of wrestling that you can bring to fighters, and you can, as long as they understand those fundamentals, they can be successful. And there's not a lot, like you don't coach wrestling the same way for scholastically. And I still do. I've done a couple of preseason clinics here in Florida for high schools. You don't coach wrestling scholastically the same way you do for MMA. Wrestling for MMA is different. And Kamal Shalarus and I really worked to hone that over the years. And Dan Severn and I have done a lot of clinics together. But I take what I've learned from wrestling that's applicable to grappling and MMA and apply it there on the mat. And they loved it at Fighting Edge.
Well, King, I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but our time has come to an end. Love to have you back again to explore more of your wealth of knowledge and experience in both worlds. But do you have any thing you want to promote, or the good old plugs, as we say in the industry?
Sure. I'm working with a wine brand now with Massimo Battista and the Real Chooch Wine. He's been on my podcast a number of times with TBT, and you're going to be able to. I'm helping to get him distribution in the key markets where he wants to be, up north in New York, and in Connecticut and Rhode Island, where I have my relationships. But it's also going to be set up where you'll be able to buy the wine directly from me. We're working on setting that up now in states where you can, through my social media. So check that out. Check out TBT Podcast and message me anywhere in the United States, not in Canada, unfortunately, but anywhere in the United States. If you've been involved in an accident, if you've been injured in an accident, with our 10X law, we can take cases anywhere in the United States with 10X law, with Berman Law Group.
That's excellent. Thanks again very much, and we'll definitely.
And one thing, Jack, where to get hold of me for those folks. The best place is Facebook. I'm full with the friends, but you can message me on there, and that's where I take my messages for potential clients. Matthew J. Granahan, Matthew J like Joseph, Granahan. And Jack, man, I wish you luck with Great North Wrestling. I want to get up there for a Great North Wrestling event. Did you see? I did a couple promos for Petawawa. I was supposed to be up there.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. We had a very good pre-sale and a stacked card, but unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, we had to cancel it for now. But we're going to come back with a vengeance in 2023, and we'll most definitely be discussing future business ventures with your company and yourself.
Yeah, and I just want to say the Hannibal TV, I love being a part of it. Check out my commentaries Hopefully you'll be entertained. And I love the heat. Bring the heat, baby, because I can handle it.
Yes, you're definitely one of the few remaining true heels in the business, and we definitely appreciate all your contributions.
Awesome.